more than 70 MPs and civil liberty groups are warning against the use of so-called vaccine passports. The passes would carry information about a person's COVID infection or if they'd had the vaccine.
We're joined now from South London by Shami Chakrabati, who believes vaccine passports are a step too far and will encourage discrimination, bullying and corruption. Good morning to you. Thanks for coming on the programme this morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
There are those, of course, that are saying that they'll allow us more freedoms. They'll allow us the freedom to be able to travel, to go to events, to open up society in the way that we all want to happen after what we've been through.
Well, to be clear, to travel internationally is a privilege, and we understand that you need passports to go to someone else's country, but that's a privilege. To be in our own communities is a fundamental right, and the science doesn't stack up for these vaccination passports, whether based on testing or on vaccination. I'm protecting myself by vaccination. I do recommend that everybody does it, but that doesn't yet mean that I might not infect other people. So as long as we need social distancing, we need to do it together. We need to protect each other. But a segregated society, which is what is being mooted by internal passports, is a recipe for discrimination, for bullying. Every bouncer or employer or shopkeeper could decide who comes in and who doesn't. That's a conflict problem. And I think it's counterproductive because history and international evidence demonstrates that you get very high take-up of things like vaccine when people feel that they're doing it voluntarily. We in Britain do not like to be coerced into vaccination or frankly anything else. And when there was compulsory vaccination in Britain in the 1800s, it led actually to the foundation and growth of the anti-vax movement. So we don't want that kind of oppression. And as I say, segregation, discriminating against pregnant women or the elderly or the young or whoever hasn't had the booster in a future vaccination cycle. So it's disproportionate, it's discriminatory and counterproductive, not the kind of Britain that we want. We do not want a segregated society with 2 queues for the supermarket and 2 queues for the football stadium.
I guess you feel that, vaccine passports could change, the way that we live our lives, but they've just changed so much in the last year or so, haven't they, anyway?
Well, they have. And Alex, we've all put up with so much. We have put up with privation, social distancing, self-isolation and so on, but we did it for a reason. We did it to protect each other. Not in a selfish and discriminatory way. We did it to protect the most vulnerable amongst us, because that's the way that we protect everyone and our way of life. And we don't want, we know that these viruses may be part of our lives for a very long time. We don't want to build this segregated society going forward. As I say, a recipe for bullying, discrimination, corruption. We already know that there are various companies getting government grants to do blue sky thinking on how you would segregate people in a football stadium, for example. There could be lots of money and fakery and forgeries and corruptions, but ultimately segregation is not the way that we want to come out of this pandemic.
Sorry to interrupt, but isn't this really a temporary measure? As we know, we're going to eventually have to learn to live with the coronavirus, as we do with the flu. 25,000 people lose their lives every year, or roundabouts. Surely this is a temporary measure just to get us back on the road to recovery. And then maybe come the end of the year, going into next year, we can actually drop vaccine passports altogether.
Well, I'm afraid that history suggests that when you introduce compulsory ID, it is less than temporary. So we saw, for example, after the war, their ID sticking around for too long until people rebelled, and we don't want to have to do that. Also, as I say, it's not justified. The science doesn't stack up that this would be a proportionate measure. So we need to keep safe. We need to be vigilant. We don't want to create false confidence in certain
But you say,
activities
sorry,
until it's safe. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt. It's only, you know, you say that the science isn't there, but then if we are wanting to open up things like events, concerts, things like that, if you've got proof that you've either had the vaccination or you've got proof that you've got a negative test, then we know that the risk in that event is going to be vastly decreased as a consequence. I mean, don't get me wrong, I haven't had the vaccine. I wish I had, so I could be facing a situation where I can't go to things if it's brought in that you have to have proof of vaccination, otherwise you can't get in. But they will have a system where you can have proof of a negative test. I'd be happy to do that if it freed up actually people being able to get back to things like going to concerts, going to venues.
I hear you. I recommend that you and all your viewers read a report published today by Big Brother Watch called Access Denied, because that deals in more detail than I can with the scientific concerns about whether this would even work in practical terms. So vaccination makes me safe from symptoms and potential death, but it doesn't currently mean, on the basis of the evidence, that I can't still infect other people. And ditto, the tests will produce a certain number of false negatives and false positives. I mean, these measures can be useful on a voluntary basis, but that they're not enough to safely justify discriminating against people. And there are pregnant women who are not currently advised to take the test. And as I say, in any vaccine cycle, like you're young and I'm an old bag, and therefore I've had my vaccine. But I wouldn't want to see you compulsorily discriminated against. I can go clubbing and you can't. And crucially, a bouncer, not even a police officer, some bouncer gets to decide who passes and who doesn't. 2 queues. That's a recipe for bullying, for discrimination, and all sorts of conflict in our communities.
OK, Shami, while we've got you here, can we get a quick reaction? Because obviously there's a lot of discussion about this race report. There's been, so much hurt, so much division caused because of it. You've been in a situation yourself where you've been the person who's authored a report that's then come in for a lot of criticism. A few years ago, the one you did for the Labour Party on anti-Semitism within the party. I mean, there are those people who are saying, who are critical of Dr. Tony Sewell because of his previous stance. What's your reaction to the fallout from this, and how much damage it's done, do you think?
Well, look, I don't want to be critical of individuals who've done their best in pandemic conditions, etc., etc. I have some concerns about the narrative of the report being perhaps too positive in its spin, and that's causing a great deal of polarisation. I don't want to add to this polarisation, but I do know that people like Doreen Lawrence. She's possibly our country's greatest ever race equality campaigner, says that this does not speak to her experience and to the experience of so many others. Of course, we want to be positive. Of course, we have made progress in a number of areas, but goodness me, there's a long way to go. And I think there are passages in this report that put too positive a spin on, for example, historical injustice and how it's still embedded in injustices today, on people's experience of discrimination in the criminal justice system, school exclusions, so on and so forth. And I think some of the recommendations could be a bit more ambitious. So I put it like that. I don't want to be unfair to people who've done difficult work in pandemic conditions, but I think this is part of an ongoing conversation, and I urge the government to listen to other voices as well.
OK, Shami Chakrabati, we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time.